A screen door banged shut behind her. Somewhere inside the house, a dog started to whine, a long, low sound that wouldn't stop. A small canvas bag hit the passenger seat of an old Honda. The engine turned over twice before it caught. Gravel spat under the tires as the car pulled out fast, no lights on yet, the sun barely up over the flat brown desert. By the time the moon rose, that same car sat empty at a rest stop off the interstate, doors unlocked, keys gone. Her name was Dee Marsh. It was the morning of her 10th wedding anniversary, and she had told no one where she was going. On the seat, inside a plastic bag, sat something she never got the chance to say out loud. What those bikers found there sent them searching. What was she running from? Stay with me on this one. Barstow is the kind of town people drive through, not to. It sits out where California runs out of green and gives up to sand and heat and long, empty stretches of road. Dee Marsh had lived there her whole married life. 10 years in a small ranch house at the end of a dirt lane, with a chain-link fence, a propane tank, and a mutt named Juniper who slept across the foot of her bed every single night. She was 34. She worked part-time at a feed store off the main highway, hauling sacks and counting change and smiling at ranchers who came in dusty and left dustier. People liked her. That was the thing everybody said later. She was easy to like. Quiet but warm. The kind of woman who remembered your kid's name and asked about your bad knee. Her husband was named Carl. Carl Marsh drove a tow truck for a garage out on the county road, and he was known around town as a hard worker and a harder man. He had a temper. Folks knew it, the way small towns know everything and say nothing. They'd seen the way Delia sometimes wore long sleeves in July. They'd seen the way she went quiet when Carl walked into a room. Nobody said a word. That's how it goes in a place like that. You mind your own. Here's the thing you have to understand about Delia. She wasn't a runner. In 10 years, she'd never once packed a bag. She'd stayed through the shouting and the slammed doors and the nights he didn't come home and the nights she wished he wouldn't. She stayed because she didn't know how to do anything else. Because leaving costs money and she didn't have any. Because Carl controlled the bank account, the truck, the phone, all of it. Every dollar she made at the feed store went into a jar he checked. So the morning she finally left, something had changed. Something big enough to move a woman who'd never moved before. 3 weeks earlier, Delia had missed her period. She didn't think much of it at first. Stress, she figured, heat. But it kept nagging at her. So one afternoon on her lunch break, she drove 2 towns over, far enough that nobody would recognize her. And she bought a pregnancy test at a drugstore and paid in cash from tips she'd hidden in the lining of her purse. She took it in the drugstore bathroom because she couldn't take it at home. Carl would find it. Carl found everything. 2 pink lines. She sat on that toilet lid for a long time, just staring at it. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of wanting a baby and being told she was broken, being told it was her fault, being told a lot of things by a man who liked to remind her she was nothing without him. And now, finally, at 34, there were 2 pink lines. And her very first feeling wasn't joy. Now here's the thing. Her very first feeling was fear. Because she knew, the way she knew the weather, that Carl could not be trusted with this. That a child in that house would grow up the way she'd lived. Watching, flinching, learning to read a man's footsteps to know what kind of night it was going to be. That was the moment Delia decided to run, not for herself. She'd have stayed for herself. She decided to run for the thing growing inside her that hadn't done anything wrong yet and never should have to pay for it. She spent 3 weeks getting ready in secret. She squirreled away tips. She found the title to the Honda, which was somehow the one thing in her name. She made a copy of her birth certificate at the library. She planned to drive to her sister Rhonda's place up in Bishop, 4 hours north, and start over there, where Carl didn't know the roads. She picked her anniversary on purpose. Believe me, that wasn't an accident. Carl always worked a double on their anniversary, out of spite, because he knew it hurt her. 10 years running, he'd left her sitting alone with a store-bought cake. This year, that meant a full day's head start before he even noticed she was gone. So that morning she got up before dawn. She packed one canvas bag with clothes and her papers and her hidden money. She stood in the kitchen a long minute, looking at the little life she was leaving. Juniper padded over and pressed her cold nose into Delia's hand, and that almost broke her. She couldn't take the dog. A dog would slow her down, would need to be dealt with, would be one more thing for Carl to hold over her. She knelt down and kissed the top of Juniper's head and whispered that she was sorry. Then she walked out and let the screen door bang, and she drove. But Delia made one mistake. In her rush, she'd left the pregnancy test in the plastic drugstore bag, the same bag that held a spare pair of shoes she'd meant to sort out and never did. And that bag rode on the passenger seat right beside her canvas one, out in the open, the one secret she'd guarded for 3 weeks now sitting in plain sight. She got maybe 200 miles that day, up and around and doubling back because she was scared Carl would somehow guess and follow. By late afternoon she was tired and rattled and low on gas, and she pulled off at a rest stop along Interstate 15 to use the bathroom and splash water on her face and breathe. And that is where the last part anyone knew of Delia Marsh's own doing came to an end, because she walked toward that cinder block restroom in the falling light, and she did not walk back. The rest stop wasn't much. A restroom building, a couple of picnic shelters, a vending machine that ate your quarters, and a parking lot baking in the last orange light of the day. Beyond it, nothing but scrub and sand out to the mountains. There'd been a man watching the lot for the better part of an hour. That's the part that turned Delia's careful plan into something else entirely. By full dark, her Honda sat alone in that lot with the doors unlocked and the keys gone and both bags still on the seat. Now this is where the Hells Angels come in. A little after 10 that night, a string of motorcycles came off the interstate and rolled into that same rest stop. 7 of them. A traveling chapter heading south, running long because the day heat was murder and the night was cooler on the engines. They were rough-looking men. Leather and beards and ink and miles. The kind of men most folks lock their doors at the sight of. Their road captain was a big man everybody called Bear. Real name Thomas Kowalski, but nobody used it. Bear was pushing 60, gray in his beard, a grandfather twice over, and he'd buried more brothers than he liked to count. He'd been riding since he was 17. He'd done things in his life he wasn't proud of, but he had a rule, and the whole chapter knew it. You don't leave a stranded soul in the desert. The desert doesn't care who you are. It kills the good and the bad the same. So when Bear saw a lone car sitting in a rest stop lot at 10 at night, doors unlocked, he did what he always did. He walked over to check on it. He shone his flashlight through the windows. Empty. He tried the door and it opened. Keys gone, but a purse still sitting in the footwell. That stopped him. A woman doesn't leave her purse. He called a couple of the others over. A younger man they called Rooster, and a quiet one named Diego who'd been a Navy corpsman before the road got him, and who was the closest thing the chapter had to a medic and a conscience. Diego leaned in and saw the 2 bags on the passenger seat. He pulled the plastic one open, gentle, just to look for a name, an address, anything to tell them who this car belonged to. He found a pair of women's shoes, and under them a long white plastic stick. He held it up to the flashlight and he went very still. "What is it?" Bear said. Diego turned it so the older man could see the little window. 2 faded pink lines. "That's a pregnancy test," Diego said. "It's positive." For a moment none of them said anything. 7 hard men standing around an empty car in the dark, staring at a little plastic stick that meant a woman out there somewhere was carrying a baby. Bear picked up the purse and opened it, found a wallet, found a driver's license. He held it up. Delia Marsh, 34, Barstow address. a face in the photo that was pretty and tired and trying to smile for the camera. "There's cash in here," Rooster said, digging deeper. "Couple $100, rolled up tight, hidden in the lining, and a birth certificate, and a car title." He looked up. "Who packs their birth certificate and hides their money in their purse lining?" "Somebody running," Diego said quietly. Bear looked out at the black desert past the edge of the lot. He'd seen a lot of things in his life. He knew what an abandoned car with the purse still in it usually meant. It usually meant the worst. "She didn't leave on her own," Bear said. "Not without this." He held up the purse. "Not without the money she was clearly saving to get somewhere. Something happened to her right here." Diego crouched by the driver's door and shone his light on the gravel. There were scuff marks, 2 sets, and a smear where a heel had dragged. He followed it a few feet toward the dark edge of the lot, and then it disappeared into the hard-packed ground. "She was dragged," Diego said. His voice had gone flat. "From here toward the road out back." Now these were not men who called the police for help. The law and the Hells Angels had a long and ugly history, and Bear knew that if 7 bikers called in a missing woman found next to blood and drag marks, the 7 bikers would spend the night in cuffs while the trail went cold. He'd seen it happen. He wasn't going to let it happen here. So Bear made a decision that changed the whole shape of that night. He looked at his brothers and he said the thing that would drive everything after. "We're not leaving her out here. Whatever's happened, wherever she is, we find her. Tonight, we don't ride south till we know." And every one of those rough men nodded, because that was the code, and because a positive pregnancy test on a car seat does something to a man that nothing else does. They fanned out. 2 of them ran the interstate in both directions on their bikes, headlights sweeping the shoulders. 2 more walked the desert behind the rest, stopped with flashlights, calling her name into the dark. Diego stayed with the car, reading the ground like a book, and Bear got on a payphone at the edge of the lot and started making calls to people who owed him favors, truckers and gas station clerks and night people who saw everything and told the law nothing. For an hour, nothing. The desert gave them nothing back but their own echoes. Then Rooster came pounding back from the interstate on foot, out of breath, waving his arms. "Trucker," he gasped. "Trucker at the fuel island a mile up. Says around dusk he saw a tow truck parked out here. Barstow plates. Said a woman was screaming and a big guy shoved her in the cab and drove off north on the county road. Trucker figured it was a domestic. Didn't want to get involved." Bear went very still. "A tow truck," he said. Diego pulled the license and the car title out of the purse and looked at them under his light. "Registered owner of this Honda, Delia Marsh." He paused. "There's a second name on an insurance card in here, Carl Marsh, husband." He looked up slow. "Occupation listed, tow truck operator." And just like that, the whole thing turned. The men climbed back on their bikes and rode hard for the county road north, the way the trucker pointed. And for the first time since they'd found the car, Bear let himself feel something like relief. They had a name. They had a direction. They had a husband in a tow truck, and a husband is easy to find in a small town. The desert was big, but a man is not. They'd have her back by sunup. It was almost over. The county road ran flat and black for 11 miles before it hit the outskirts of Barstow. 7 bikes strung out across it, going too fast, headlights punching holes in the dark. Bear kept telling himself it was almost over. Find the tow truck, find the husband, find the woman. Simple. Then Rooster, riding point, threw up his fist, the signal to stop. They coasted down and killed their engines. Up ahead, pulled off on the shoulder, sat a tow truck with its cab light on. Empty. Engine ticking as it cooled. And beyond it, out in the scrub, a single flashlight beam swinging back and forth, low to the ground. Like a man looking for something. Or digging. That's when everything changed nature. because Diego walked up to the abandoned tow truck, put his hand on the hood, and then shone his light into the empty cab. On the passenger floor there was blood, not a smear this time, a pool, and a woman's shoe. And Diego turned around, and his face in the flashlight had gone gray, and he said the words that turned a rescue into something far worse. "This isn't a runaway anymore. This is a man out there in the dark trying to bury a body before morning." The relief drained out of Bear like water out of a cracked jug. This was no longer about catching up to a fleeing wife. There was that much blood in that cab. Every second they stood, there was a second that could be the difference between a living woman and a grave in the sand. And here's the part that made it colder. That flashlight out in the scrub wasn't running. It was working. Slow, patient, methodical. Whoever held it thought he had all the time in the world. He thought there were no witnesses out here on 11 empty miles of county road at midnight. He was wrong. 7 of them had just found him. Bear made the second decision of the night, and this one he made in a whisper. "No engines. We go on foot, spread wide. Diego, you're with me. Nobody does anything stupid. We get her first. We deal with him second. If you're still with me this far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what these men did next is the reason I wanted to tell you this story in the first place." They moved out across the desert in a line, quiet as they could be for big men in heavy boots, closing on that swinging light from 3 sides. The moon was up now, enough to see by, and as they got closer they could make out the shape of a man. Big, broad through the shoulders. He had a shovel in one hand and the flashlight in the other, and he was standing over a low mound of freshly turned earth, patting it down with the back of the blade. And off to the side, 20 feet away, half in the scrub, there was another shape. Smaller, not moving. Diego saw it first and broke into a dead run, and to hell with quiet. The man with the shovel spun around. In the moonlight they could all see his face now, red and sweating, eyes wild. Carl Marsh. He saw 7 leather-clad shapes coming out of the dark at him from 3 directions, and he did the math, and he swung the shovel up like a bat. "Get off my land," he screamed, though it wasn't his land, it was just desert. "This is between me and my wife. This is family business." Bear stepped into the flashlight so Carl could see him full. 60 years old, gray-bearded, calm as a stone. "Son," Bear said, "you're standing over a fresh grave with a shovel in your hand. There's nothing about tonight that's staying family business." Carl's eyes flicked to the small shape in the scrub. And that flick told Bear everything. That's where she was, and she wasn't in the grave. The grave was for after. Diego reached her first and dropped to his knees. Delia Marsh was alive. Barely. Carl had beaten her badly at the rest stop, thrown her in the tow truck, driven her out here to finish it, and put her in the ground where nobody would look for years. She'd fought him in the truck. That was the blood. She'd gotten the door open and half fallen out and crawled the 20 feet she managed before her body quit. And Carl, cool as anything, had figured she wasn't going anywhere and started digging the hole first. Diego's hands moved fast. Corpsman hands. He found the pulse, thready but there. He pressed his jacket against the worst of the bleeding on her scalp. He talked to her low and steady, told her she was safe now, told her she wasn't alone, told her to hold on. Carl saw all of this and something in him snapped. He'd already decided she was dead. Seeing her alive, seeing these men around her, seeing his careful night coming apart, he lifted the shovel and charged straight at Diego and the woman on the ground. He never made it. Bear caught the shovel handle mid-swing with one big hand and just stopped it dead, like catching a screen door in the wind. Then he took it away from him. 2 of the others had Carl by the arms before he could throw a punch. He thrashed and screamed and cursed them, spit flying, calling Delia every filthy name he had, and Bear listened to about 4 seconds of it. Then Bear got right down in Carl's face, quiet, and said one thing. That woman is pregnant. You are going to bury your own child out here in the sand." And Carl stopped struggling, just for a second. And in that second his face showed that he hadn't known. She'd never told him. That was the whole reason she ran, so he'd never know, so this child would never be his to ruin. And now he knew, standing in the desert with two bikers holding his arms and a grave he'd dug at his feet, and the knowing landed on him like a wall. He started. "I didn't know she was." "No," Bear said. "You didn't, but you'd have done it anyway. You already dug the hole." "Now here's the part I want you to sit with. These were outlaws, men the law called criminals. And every instinct in that circle wanted to put Carl Marsh in the hole he dug for his wife and drive south and never think about it again. Nobody would have found him for years. The desert keeps its secrets. Rooster said it out loud, low and hard. We could end this right here. And Bear, who had done things in his life he wasn't proud of, shook his head. "No," he said. "She doesn't need us to make her a widow with a dead man on her conscience. She needs to be alive. She needs this baby born, and she needs the law to write down in ink exactly what he did so it can never be called family business again." He looked at Carl. "You're going to answer for this the slow way, in a courtroom." With her sitting 3 feet away, whole and healthy, while they read it out loud. That was the harder thing to do, and Bear knew it, and he did it anyway. They tied Carl to the bumper of his own tow truck with a tow chain, which had a kind of justice to it. Diego stabilized Delia as best he could, and they carried her, careful as anything, out to the road. Bear got on the payphone back at the rest stop and called the county sheriff. And for the first time in his life, he gave the law his real name and stayed put until the flashing lights came, because a woman's life was worth more than his rule about never talking to cops. The ambulance came. The deputies came. They found the grave and the shovel and the blood in the cab, and Carl Marsh chained to his own truck screaming about his rights. And they found 7 Hell's Angels who didn't run, who stayed and gave statements, who handed over a purse with a hidden roll of cash and a car title and a birth certificate and a pregnancy test. All of it laid out so the law could see exactly what kind of woman they'd pulled out of the sand. A woman who'd planned so carefully. A woman who'd almost made it. The sun was coming up over the desert by the time they loaded Delia into the ambulance. She was awake now, just barely. And as they wheeled her past, she caught Bear's sleeve with 2 fingers, weak as a child, and she looked up at this huge gray-bearded stranger who had no reason on earth to have saved her life. And she tried to say thank you and couldn't get the words out. Bear just put his big hand over her small one and said, "You rest now. You and the little one both. You made it. You hear me. You made it." And then the doors closed and she was gone toward the hospital, toward living. Delia Marsh spent 9 days in the county hospital. A fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and injuries the papers didn't print. The doctors weren't sure at first about the baby, but the baby held on. Whatever that child was made of, it was made of the same stuff that crawled 20 feet across the desert with a fractured skull rather than lie down and die. It held on. Carl Marsh was charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and a stack of other things. At the trial, the prosecutor laid it all out just like Bear said he would, in ink, out loud, with Delia sitting 3 feet away, whole and healthy and 8 months along by then, one hand resting on her belly the whole time. The pregnancy test was entered into evidence. The jury looked at that little plastic stick for a long time. It took them under 2 hours to convict on every count. Carl went away for 30 years. Out in that same desert, folks said, was a hole he'd dug for his wife that the county filled back in. Now here's the thing about those 7 men. They didn't ride south the next morning like they'd planned. They stayed. Bear told the chapter they weren't leaving until they knew she'd live, and they didn't. They took rooms at a cheap motel off the interstate. And every single day, one or two of them would show up at the hospital in their leather and their boots and their beards, and they'd sit in that waiting room, terrifying the staff, holding little grocery store flowers in their huge scarred hands, waiting to hear how she was doing. The nurses were scared of them at first. Everybody was. And then the nurses figured out that these were the men who'd pulled the woman in room 4 out of a grave, and after that the coffee was always fresh when they came. Diego went the most. The corpsman. He'd sit by her bed when she was up to it and just talk to her, easy and low, the way he had in the desert. He never made her tell the story. He never asked for anything. He'd just make sure she knew she wasn't alone, over and over, until she started to believe it might be true. Her sister Rhonda came down from Bishop, the one Delia had been driving toward. And when Rhonda found out that a chapter of Hell's Angels had saved her sister's life and then stayed 9 days to make sure it took, she didn't know what to do with that. She'd spent her whole life being taught what those men were. And here they were, filling a hospital waiting room with cheap flowers, refusing to leave. There was one more thing. Somebody had gone back to the ranch house at the end of the dirt lane, fed the dog, because in all the noise of that terrible night, Delia had asked one thing over and over, half-conscious in the ambulance. "Juniper, my dog, she's still at the house. Please." And Rooster, the youngest one, the one who'd wanted to put Carl in the hole, had driven out there himself the next morning and found that mutt still sitting at the screen door where Delia had left her, whining, waiting. And Rooster couldn't leave a dog like that. So he brought Juniper to the motel and fed her out of his own hand. And when Delia was finally well enough to have visitors on her feet, he walked that dog right into the hospital lobby, rules or no rules, and let her put her cold nose in Delia's hand one more time. That was the moment Delia broke down, not for herself, not for what Carl did, for the dog she thought she'd lost and the men she'd never met who'd saved everything she loved. The baby came a month later, a girl, healthy, loud, 7 pounds and furious at the world in the best way. Delia named her Thomasina. It's an odd name for a little girl, and people asked her about it and she'd just smile and say it was after a friend. She never explained. She didn't have to. Bear knew. Thomas Kowalski, the road captain who'd walked over to check on an empty car in the dark, because the desert doesn't care who you are. The chapter finally rode south when Delia and the baby came home from the hospital, but they never really left her life. Every year, on a certain morning in the desert heat, a string of motorcycles would come off the interstate and roll up that dirt lane to the little ranch house. Not on her wedding anniversary. They never spoke of that day. They came on the baby's birthday instead, the day everything that could have ended in a grave began again as something living. And Delia would come out onto the porch with Thomasina on her hip and Juniper barking circles in the yard, and she'd watch these huge gray men climb off their bikes, and every year Bear got a little grayer and moved a little slower, and every year he'd hold that little girl up and marvel that she was real. Delia lived a long, full life after that. She left Barstow eventually. Moved up near her sister, raised her daughter in a green place with mountains, and she told Thomasina the whole story when the girl was old enough to hear it. Told her about the 2 pink lines in a drugstore bathroom, and the screen door, and the desert, and the 7 men who came out of the dark. She used to end it the same way every time. She'd say the desert almost took her, and it would have, except a man most people would cross the street to avoid stopped his motorcycle to check on an empty car. And that, she'd tell her daughter, is why you never decide what's inside a person by how rough the outside looks. The screen door that banged shut behind her that morning, the one that started all of it, she took the actual door with her when she moved. Kept it. Hung it in the garage of the new house, a beat-up old screen door that didn't fit any frame there. People thought it was junk. She never explained that one either, but she knew. It was the last door she ever walked out of running scared. And on the other side of it, though she couldn't have known it that morning, 7 strangers were already riding south on the interstate, hours from a rest stop, hours from a plastic bag on a passenger seat, hours from the moment they'd decide a stranger's life was worth staying for. She made it. She and the little one both, just like the man said.